Welcome back to Goals on Sunday. Glenn Murray is our guest this morning. Always a treat to have you in the studio, Glenn. One of the things we were looking at this week when we were talking about you coming in was just how many different clubs you've been at and the range of clubs and different leagues you've been in going back.
Is that a good thing, Ben?
I think it's a good thing because it shows how hard you've worked to get the success that you've got today.
How did you end up in Wilmington Hammerheads?
Just playing for an amateur team up in Cumbria, in Maryport. And funnily enough, turn of events, the head coach of that team, his brother was David Irving, who played out in the States in the 70s. Still over there at Wilmington. He said, "Do you fancy going out and playing for my brother?" I was like, "Yeah, why not?" And that's how it
So you had a bit of time out there. What was it like playing abroad?
Yeah, brilliant. I was a young boy. Wasn't much money involved, anything like that. It was just lifestyle. They paid for our apartment, things like that, and then trained every day. Went down the beach in the afternoon. It was just perfect. And but, I mean, the dream was always to come back and play in the Football League because that's what I'd grown up watching.
Yeah.
But once you started at that level, did you ever imagine that today you could be where you are?
No, I never imagined I'd make it the Football League. But it's just things happen, don't they? Mick McCarthy came out on a pre-season tour with Sunderland, invited me back. Wasn't for him, unfortunately. Anyone you want me to call? I said, yeah, Paul Simpson, please. Called him. 6 weeks later, called me up. Fancy coming for a reserve game.
Brilliant.
Scored. And just the rest is history.
As easy as that. And Mick McCarthy's responsible for that?
Yeah. Knock-on effect from Mick McCarthy coming out to the States on tour.
But equally, had you not played well in the pre-season game, you might not have. I mean,
exactly. And then the reserve game for Carlisle, and then I think I spent about 10, 12 weeks on trial at Carlisle. Paul Simpson wasn't sure. Sent me on loan to not on loan, obviously. Sent me down to Barrow to play some games as they were only in the league below at the time. Carlisle were in the conference, Barrow in the Conference North. Scored 10 in 10. And
that's not bad.
Left him with no option but to give me a contract, and never looked back really.
And once you got into the Carlisle team and you're suddenly playing league football and you're thinking, goodness me, this is unprofessional. I mean, I still imagine it wasn't massively well paid, but that's the dream. You're starting to achieve it. Are you still thinking, I've got a chance beyond this, or is it just about where you are at that moment?
Just about where I am at that moment, and just trying to. It took me a while to find my feet. To be honest. We got, in the 18 months, because I signed in like the January sort of time, in the 18 months I spent there, we got back-to-back promotions, and the club just moved too fast for me. I just didn't develop as quick as the club did. Signed in the conference, ended up in League One in 18 months, and I had to take a step back to Rochdale. Yeah. And then was with Keith Hill and Dave Flitcroft, who were massive for my career.
But how difficult was it when the Carlisle are flying and you're feeling like you can't keep up with pace? That must be difficult for your confidence.
Do you know what? I've never been technically blessed. So at that stage of my career, I just made a conscious decision to work my nuts off.
That's the technical term.
Yeah. And do you know what? There's a lot of older pros around me, and I would literally be like, "Don't worry, I'll do it. I'll run for you. Don't worry." Do you know what I mean? And just eager, determined, just desperate to play the game, and yeah, it's all worked out well, but it took for me to move to Rochdale to really find my goal-scoring form.
Does that step...
So, to be fair, you've got your just desserts then, haven't you, really? If that is the case, that mindset was there in the first place.
Yeah, because I'd stepped into a changing room of professional footballers that had been professionals for a long time. I was the young kid on the block sort of thing, and it was up to me to prove myself, not only on the field, but I felt to them, as professionals, as seasoned professionals. And yeah, I'd been desperate for that opportunity, and I was just, I wanted to take it with both hands and anything I could, and if it started with working hard, then that's what I would do.
And in terms of the experience you garnered by working through the leagues as well, now you're sitting in the Premier League. I mean, sort of that work ethic you were given, the fact that you were treated in a very different way, I should imagine, just because there weren't the resources to treat footballers down there like there are for you at Brighton. Does that still live with you to this day? Yeah,
and I think I've been blessed really, because my career has always been a steady incline. I've never really stepped back too far or had any falls really. So
even having to go back to Rochdale.
No, because I was still hungry. I hadn't proven myself at that level. So yeah, I was still desperately hungry. And like I mentioned, Keith Hill, who's still at Rochdale now, is fantastic at bringing young professionals through. And I just thrived in that environment, and I couldn't thank him and Dave Flitcroft enough. Yeah, and obviously Rochdale are sort of a club that are willing to sell players, and when I signed there, I felt as though if I scored goals for this club, then I could move on, and they thankfully helped me with that.
Willing to sell or have to sell?
I think they understand what they are. They're in an area where they develop a lot of footballers, and they take the chances on the kids from non-league and the lower leagues and develop them and sell them on, and that's the way that they run it, really.
I mean, we're seeing more and more players in the England side now who have worked through the leagues as well. And actually, is there a temptation, do you think, for some young, very gifted, talented players who get picked up by some of the big Premier League clubs to think that's the only way is to stay there? But the education you get if you go through some of the lower leagues will stand you in good stead when eventually you get your chance.
Yeah, I think it will, because you learn how to work hard. You learn how to adapt your game in different scenarios. The Premier League's very football focused these days, but when you move down the leagues, it's very physical, and you learn how to look after yourself. I think James Maddison's stepped up with Leicester this year, and he earned his stripes in the Championship, and he'll have been kicked from pillar to post, but he'll be used to that, and now he's stepped in the Premier League and nothing like that bothers him. Yeah, he's flying, and I think that shows that the players are there in League One, the Championship, to step up and go to the next level. And obviously Mason Mount at the minute at Derby, I know he's a Chelsea player, but he's still doing it in the Championship, and he got his call up.
We've just been given a stat, Glenn. I'm not sure you've got this one, but you've scored against 80 of the 94 league clubs you've played against. So more or less any team you play against, there's only 14 that you haven't managed to score a goal, which sort of would be exactly why. Oh, start at left, right. And that would be why Tony Bloom, he's the current chairman, he was director, he signed you back in 2008. But that's why he sort of gave them the money, didn't £300,000, and he gave the club the money to sign you at the time, which seems now a snip in the ocean, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was a record for the club back then, I think, and it was a funny scenario actually, because I moved into a predominantly Brighton-born team. I think there was 7, 8, 9 of the boys playing in that team at the time were Brighton-born, and that's pretty much unheard of, and that's because Dean Wilkins brought them through from the youth team, and yeah, it was one of those ones where I had never really heard of Brighton Hove Albion, being a northern boy. I'd obviously heard rumours of sort of northwestern clubs looking at me when I was at Rochdale. And when they said we've agreed with Brighton, I was like, geez, Brighton.
Where's Brighton?
Well, yeah, went down there and I got told in the office that day, funnily enough, you'll love it down here, you'll never leave. And I was like, oh, I'm not sure about that. And funnily enough, yeah, that's how it all panned out.
And the change in those 10 years has been dramatic for Brighton, hasn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
phenomenal.
What was it like from when you first arrived to what the experience is now?
It's just like two different football clubs. We used to train in a university campus. The changing rooms weren't big enough to fit the whole team into. We split into 3 different ones. Yeah, I mean, the stadium, the running track around it, fans getting wet week in, week out. They were the real diehards, to be fair to them. And then to return to the club in the Amex with a brand new training facility is just frightening.
Yeah, and interestingly, sort of you've got Dan Ashworth coming in, technical director. Obviously, sort of brought in from the FA. That feels like quite a statement to make. Does it feel like that from the players' perspective?
Yeah, definitely. And I think Tony's always looking, Tony and Paul Barber for that matter, are always looking to progress the club, and not always on the playing staff. A lot of stuff behind closed doors is done, and they're constantly trying to improve the stadium and the facilities that we've got. And with Dan coming into the club.
Have you met him yet?
Not yet, no. I think he starts early next year, I think.
Yeah. And then, of course, you've got the manager who widely respected in the game. How important has Chris Hughton been for you, Glenn?
He's been absolutely massive for me. He has. He's shown faith in me a lot. I can't thank him enough. And to be honest, probably at my age, I think there wouldn't be many Premier League managers starting me week in, week out, but he is, and I'd like to think that I'm repaying him for the faith he's shown in me. Is he
as involved in training as you'd assume he is?
Yeah, every day out there, come rain, come shine. He's brilliant for us. He keeps us grounded. He never lets us get too high, and he just he gives a real air of calmness off around the place, and we all know where we stand with him. He's honest, which is difficult to come to in a manager sometimes.
Well, the game you can't remember was the Newcastle game, of course, last week.
Yeah.
And he showed his dignity when asked about, you know, did he have any grievances with Newcastle United? And he said no, only happy memories.
I mean, I spoke to the gaffer briefly in the hotel before the game, and he had nothing but good things to say about Newcastle and the club and the area. He said he loved his time up there, and yeah, he's always very dignified, and he shows his class when asked those questions.
He's only ever been lovely when I've met him when he's come in here. Does he ever lose it? Has he got a side that comes out occasionally that...
Yeah, he has, yeah. In the heat of the moment, in the heat of battle, half times, full times, if we're not doing as he wishes or as he thinks we can do, then he will let us know in no uncertain terms. And I think you've got to have that as a manager. That's part and parcel of it. But I think he'll defend any of us to the hilt in front of the media. But behind closed doors, he tells us how it is.
I'm sure you've still got plenty of years running in you left, Glenn, but I imagine undoubtedly, because you've come right the way through, you're thinking about the future as well. Is management and that side of things something you think you might be interested in? And would Chris be the sort of manager that you'd model yourself on?
Yeah, definitely. I think I think it's a very difficult balance being a manager, especially at the Premier League level. I think it's more about keeping sort of 25 to 30 egos in check rather than the actual gameplay. And it's a very difficult balancing act, and he does it very well. But for me, do you know what? At the minute, I'm just concentrating on what I'm doing, and whatever comes my way in the future, then we'll see.
Just saying that though, just going back on the egos, how different is that from when you started?
Just worlds and worlds apart. Yeah, I mean, literally everyone just pulling in the same direction, and sometimes that's difficult to get. We thankfully have got that at Brighton, but I mean, just with the people that are involved in football, players have obviously agents and things, and if things aren't going well, I think that people surrounding certain players tell them what they want to hear rather than the truth, which is sometimes hard to hear. For a player, you're not working hard enough, you're not doing your job, and you can say, well, I don't want you to be my agent anymore, you're not in my circle of trust anymore, do you know what I mean? So there's that balancing act as well, and yeah, it's difficult for the players these days, but I think people need to be told sometimes when they may not be pulling the weight.